we have four very special people I'd love to invite up on stage because it is their story and their perspectives on education that we'd like you to hear this morning. So please welcome them. Belinda, Tanoto, Indonesia, Ms. Shahira, Yayasan, Hasanah from Malaysia, Amitav from India, and Wendy, Teach for All, based in New York. Right, I know you've been listening, so we will not want you to keep too quiet for the rest of the hour. But I think it'd be useful for us as a start, or for me to just ask them a very simple question. And that really is, please tell us what you do and how you've got to this space that you're in within the education sector, and possibly some of the challenges or rewards that come with it. So perhaps let's hear from Belinda.
Okay, sounds good. I'll start a little bit by sharing a story about my family. We're a family foundation in Indonesia. And then I'll move on to the foundation and the challenges we see in Indonesia. Education is something that our family holds very dear to our heart. My parents were forced to quit high school at the age of 17, both of them, because of unfavorable economic circumstances. They didn't give up, but rather they pursued self-study outside of the formal education system. And that pursuit of lifelong learning has enabled them to grow the family business, but it also made them realize that education should not be so hard to attain, that every child should have the opportunity to pursue a productive education so that they can lead healthy and productive lives, that they should have the opportunity to fulfill their own potential. So in 2001, they started the foundation, and we subsequently expanded our programs to cover also empowerment, which is livelihood issues, as well as enhancement, which is healthcare. Over the years, one of the challenges that we see, one of our most successful programs is Pelita Pendidikan program. So it's a school improvement program working with rural schools in Indonesia. And the challenges that we see is that a lot of us are doing it in silo instead of collaborating. So I'd love to hear also from the others how we can help support the ecosystem to support more collaboration.
Great, thank you, Belinda. Shahira, tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thank you, VPN, for this opportunity to share the Hasanah story. So my story is quite straightforward, actually. I spent 20 years of my life in the corporate sector for profit, and and I was doing 3 years in think tank, 7 years in an FMCG, and then 10 years actually in the sovereign investment fund of Malaysia, Khazanah National, and but I was doing corporate affairs, public affairs, so in a way, I think we were the goodwill ambassador of the organization and the bit that brings the heart to the organization. But even within that, I was sharing with some of my colleagues that, it's been a restless 20 years in that sense, because you're always searching for purpose and meaning and what is it that I'm doing and all of that. So that's been my personal story, and so I believe that actually the universe kind of conspires towards whatever energy you put out, and I strongly believe that wherever you are today is where you are meant to be, and so here I am. So in 2013, I actually helped write the strategy paper for the establishment of this foundation. For the last 10 years, the fund, the investment fund, was doing the usual CSR, and the board decided that we need to look at our contribution to social issues in a more sustained and institutionalized and strategic way. So we then looked at that and developed this paper. So fast forward, July 2015, the foundation was set up. Here I am. I'll talk to you a little bit more about what we do later.
Thanks, Shahira. Yeah. Amitav, tell us your story.
Let me start by saying, Lai Cheng, that I think there is a direct correlation between being in a boring job and you realizing your dream. And that's exactly my story. I was in an extremely boring job for 9 years. 12 years ago is when my journey began, when I was part of that boring job. And it was in Bangkok that I was at a sales conference with a close colleague sitting in a bar, extremely intoxicated, and having this conversation. And I think he asked me this, what now is the turning point in my life, a very important question, is, do you like what you do? I said, I hate what I do. But what do you want to do? I said, I don't know what I want to do. I said, well, what do you love? What are you passionate about? I said, the only thing I really love is kids. I love children. And he said, well, what do you want to do with that? I said, I don't know. That's why it's just a passion. I love children. I wish I could do something. I wish I could make a career out of it. But unfortunately, I couldn't. And I left my job, fortunately, went into another boring job, continued. He left his job. We were colleagues working in the same office in Princeton and then in Mumbai. And then I went on to work with another pharmaceutical company in Delhi. He went on to become a search firm executive. And 3 years later, he got a mandate to look for a country head for a nonprofit organization. And he picks up the phone and he calls me. I'm sitting in Delhi, he's sitting in Mumbai. And he said, you still passionate about kids? I said, yeah. You want to do something in education? I said, I don't know anything about education, but I'll give it a shot. What are you talking about? And basically, he was mandated to look for the country head for an organization called Absolute Return for Kids, a UK-based nonprofit doing fantastic work. They wanted someone with a management background and a passion for kids and education, and that was me. And that's basically how my journey began. I think the lesson from that, Lai Cheng, for me is share your dreams with everybody because you don't know who is responsible for making them come true.
So you realize Amitav set up his own NGO, whereas the other two are heading or running foundations. Wendy's story, Teach for All.
Yes. Well, I feel very, very lucky that I never found that boring job. I found my way to this 28 years ago, actually, when I was a senior in college and I'd become very fixated on just the vast inequities in my own country in the United States and was just searching for a way to do something about that and felt that I wasn't alone and that there were thousands of other graduating seniors out there who were similarly searching. And one day just thought of this idea, why aren't we being recruited as aggressively to commit 2 years to teach in the highest need communities in our country as we were being recruited at the time to commit 2 years to work on Wall Street. I needed a thesis topic and started researching this and becoming all the more obsessed with it, with the idea that this would make a real impact for kids during those 2 years, and that also it would reshape a generation, to have your first 2 years out of college be teaching in low-income communities instead of working in banks. I thought that would, reshape the priorities and the consciousness of our country. And that idea has sent me on this journey. This morning we heard from 2 of the fellows of Teach for Thailand, and they were describing their experience teaching and what it had led them to decide. And essentially they realized in their teaching experience how much potential their kids have, and at the same time how big and complex the challenges are that face them. And as a result, they've each realized they're not going to leave this work. They came in very unsuspecting, but because of that, they're still going at it. And when I think about why I'm still here, it's so much because of the same thing, realizing this can make a huge difference, but also realizing the path to really making a sustainable and meaningful difference is much bigger. And I'll just say, one of the best parts of this journey started about 11 years ago. I had my head down and was fully focused on the US, trying to make Teach for America, bigger and better, when there was just something in the water in the rest of the world. And I met 13 people that year from India to Chile to Lebanon to the next place who really wanted to do something similar in their countries and were looking for help. And ultimately that led to the launch of Teach for All, which is a network of organizations in now 45 countries and growing that share this common purpose, that we think of it as to develop collective leadership to ensure all children fulfill their potential through galvanizing the rising generation of leaders to channel their energy into this arena and supporting and developing them into a lifetime of leadership, and not only their leadership, but so that they're inspiring the leadership of others, of their students, of other teachers, of others in their communities. So that's a little bit about what we're doing.
Thank you, Wendy. Let's get down to the theme of our plenary, quality education for all, and I hope you have some questions in mind to engage our special guests. But before I ask you to take the mic or ask your question, could you tell us, and we don't have to go in any particular order, what does quality for all mean in the context that you most work in, the country that you most work in? And would you think, stemming from what Ping Xin shared earlier on, are there certain innovations that we should think about to try and have a different outcome from all that we've always been expecting? Okay, so any one of you could comment if you like. What does quality for education mean for all? Mean for you in the context that you most work in?
Okay, so quality is quite hard to define, right, in the context of education. So quality is no longer defined by what is good for today, but what is good for tomorrow, right? So if you think about 21st century learning and things like that. And yet, we actually haven't quite grasped what will be tomorrow and in the future. So therein lies the challenge of measurements and indicators and what are you trying to do in classrooms and things like that. And really, I think when we think about quality, it's really about unleashing the full potential of the child, right? And that's really about being a good human being, economically, independent, happy, contributing to society, and just being a useful member of society and community. But we don't measure those things in schools. So therein lies the challenge, actually, in today's environment in the classroom, where we have evolved beyond academic achievements and school, grades and school levels and things like that. So that's how I look at it.
That's the context of Malaysia, yeah?
Maybe I'm going to jump in a little bit. I do agree that quality is very context dependent. But at the same time, when we were chatting earlier before the session, we noticed that a lot of the problems that we're facing in education are very similar. We need more, better teachers. We need the school systems and policies to support. We need school leaders in the school. So increasingly, we see that there are ways for us, given the similarities in the different systems, that there are ways for us to learn from each other. Beyond that, I also think, for us to be tackling such a big problem for quality for all, meaning regardless of where you're born, regardless of where this child is born, to get access to quality education, we would have to work together. One of the things that we did, we deliver programs on the ground, and we've been doing it for about 8 years now. But we're only in 300 schools, and there are 300,000 schools in Indonesia. I mean, the scale of the problem is immense. And the kids need the intervention now, right? Not tomorrow, not through a blueprint, not through a roadmap in 2020, 2025, but interventions now. So I think it's important for us to think about how can we support collaborations, as well as breaking down the silos, whether we're funders or nonprofits doing work in education.
Talk a bit about what we can expect out of the country that you're working in, because I think quality cannot be absolute. It's so contextual.
So I think, Lai Cheng, I'm going to take a slightly different point of view on this, and more sort of evidence-based, not my opinion, but some of you may recall in 2007, McKinsey had done this sort of path-breaking study on how the school systems of certain countries keep getting better. and they had graded it into 4 categories: poor to fair, fair to good, good to great, and great to excellent. Just to put it in context, specifically talking about India, 1.4 million schools, 250 million kids, 900,000 schools are run by government, 500,000 are run by the private sector, 9 million teachers. 50% of our children in grade 5 can't read a grade 2 text. 50% of our children in grade 5 can't do a simple subtraction sum. Less than 30% of our children who finish primary school go on to completing grade 10. Less than 50% of those kids who graduate from secondary go on to college. If I were to then categorize where India is in the grand scheme of things, looking at the McKinsey study, we're in the category poor. Now, if you're looking from a poor to fair transition, I use the analogy of constructing a building and putting that in the context of education. The first thing you would do is have a blueprint. The first thing you would do is have a roadmap. Unfortunately, we don't have one yet. So what does that roadmap look like? I think having an accountable framework, having a set of committed and motivated stakeholders, and having clear objectives and goals on what you're trying to achieve, both in pre-primary, in primary, and in secondary education. I think we need that to start with. That's the foundation of that building. Then we come to building those pillars, the support structures. And if you go back to that study, it essentially says the following 6 things. It talks about reviewing the curriculum and the standards that may have been defined, keeping the context in mind. Bear in mind, we're a poor educational economy. So keeping that context in mind, we need to review our curriculum and our standards. We need to review the reward and remuneration process for the stakeholders involved, most importantly, the teachers. We need to then build the technical skills of our teachers and our leaders. We need to assess student learning on a regular basis. We need to collect that student data and utilize it effectively. And then we need to define policy and legislation around that education. And then coming to building the sort of building blocks, the stories, the floors that will complete this construction. Again, in the poor to fair category, they essentially say 3 things. One is providing motivation and scaffolding for low-skilled teachers. Bear in mind, we're poor for a reason. So our teachers are probably fairly low-skilled. If we can provide motivation and scaffolding for them. Secondly, bringing all schools to a minimum quality standard. While we aspire to achieve the best, what is the minimum that every school can deliver? And third, make sure students attend schools. So that's kind of how I'd like to summarize what the state of
Did you
affairs
say
in
you
India
used to
is.
work for McKinsey?
I did not. I did not.
That is very comprehensive summary of the report that McKinsey did. Wendy, 28 years of experience. Yeah.
You know, over the last year, we came together across the Teach for All network. I mean, people from the most developed countries and the least developed countries really coming together to ask ourselves the question, actually, of what are we working towards 25 years from now? And so as part of that process, we started talking with futurists about what is the world going to look like 25 years from now. And ultimately, we articulated a vision of the future where we'll see, you know, whole communities providing kids the education, support, and opportunity to shape a better future for themselves and all of us. And I guess when you ask about quality education, the first place I go is to that, to say, you know, what is the ultimate end of an education? Like, we're trying to ensure that the kids in our classrooms today can shape a better future for themselves, meaning navigate a turbulent economy. We can eliminate half the jobs on the planet today with existing technology. And for all of us, solve these increasingly complex global and local challenges that are, you know, really threatening our planet. And I guess as we got our head around that, like really stepped back and thought about it in that way, we realized, you know, we've got to make sure that the kids in our classrooms are growing as leaders who have the agency and awareness and dispositions and proficiencies to be able to do that. And, yet we're working in systems that are oriented far more narrowly, typically. So I think the imperative around really reimagining education so that we can accomplish that has really grown for us. The other thing I'll just say to the question of contextualization versus not, I've come to see, I do believe kind of all of this is true. Like, I think we can learn so much. If we've learned anything across the Teach for All network in the last 10 years, it's that the roots of the situations we're addressing are so similar that we really can speed up progress by learning across borders. And at the same time, we've seen that the answers do need to be so contextualized. And my very biggest thought about what needs to happen to get us all on a faster trajectory towards true quality education for all is that I think we need to step back within our communities to ask ourselves, considering the local culture and context, the local values and aspirations, the actual challenges facing kids, the actual pathways to opportunity, what do we want to have be true for our kids? I mean, truly, again, stepping back and saying, by the time our kids are 25, what do we want to have be true? I think if we were having that conversation, we'd realize we could then ask ourselves the question, are we on a path to that? Probably not, and it's going to mean that we're going to have to rethink everything. You know, what outcomes we're working towards for kids, how we're working towards them, the role of not only our schools, but the surrounding actors in communities.
Right, thank you. So can I invite some of you to share your thoughts or ask a question? Please. Does he need a mic?
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Gautam from Poverty Action Lab. So I have a specific question for all of you. My question is about the typical classrooms that these children are in that we're talking about. Your children are sitting on the floor, maybe on benches. There's a blackboard, there's chalk, there's a teacher, there's textbooks. Maybe not all those things, but most of those things are there. Over the years, all those things are getting there for these children, but we're not seeing these children prepared for success, prepared for their life. So my question for all of you is, what are the new things you're working on for those types of classrooms to make children successful? You know, given that we know across the world, the last 10 years, we've all pushed for that to happen. There's far more of these classrooms in schools across the world, but they're not working. So what's the new thing that needs to be brought in?
Good question, Gautam. Amitav.
I think specifically the work we do, Gautam, is around basically turning around failing government schools. If you look at government schools in India, of the 900,000 I mentioned, 300,000 are virtually empty. We call them small schools. These are less than 20 kids, which means that 20 kids spread across 6 different grades in primary education. So one teacher for 20 children all grouped together. What we're doing is we're changing the way the classroom is structured in that every classroom has a teacher. So we break these kids up into 6 different grades. We are able to appoint a teacher per grade. I don't think we're doing anything radically different right now because the fundamentals are so weak. Just the fact that we don't have even a teacher per grade is our starting point. So we need to change that to start with. The second thing which I think is very important, which we instill in all of our partnerships and collaborations, is monitoring and evaluation. Firstly, student assessments, using that data on a very regular basis to see how kids are performing, not only at the highest level, but all kids, and then being able to provide interventions that take care of that. So that's kind of what we do.
Maybe I will also share a little bit about the Trust School program that we're funding in Malaysia. It's essentially the public school. So we have the sort of the building, the floors, the tables, the chairs, So all of that is there. So essentially, the Trust School program is a partnership that we had with the Ministry of Education, where we said that if you change the way in which the kids' learning experiences are in school, so it's pedagogical, you will see some outcomes, right? So, the partnership with Ministry of Education, the deal was that we will demonstrate 220 schools over a period of 5 years. So up till 2020, we will deliver 200. So it's essentially proof of concept to show that when you actually work in the school. So there are 4 things that we work in the school. One is the school leadership and management intervention. So all trust schools essentially have their own autonomy. We work on the school leadership and management. We look at maximizing student potential, so it's essentially around pedagogical intervention. And then there's something around transforming teaching and learning. And the 4th pillar is basically engagement of parents and community. So the biggest change that we've seen is around school leadership and management. So when we go to the schools and actually spend time with the teachers, that's seen the biggest sort of impact. Student potential and student performance is obviously a work in progress. So if you know, we have the Malaysian Education Blueprint, which actually we worked together with the ministry as well. We provided some inputs. And the Education Blueprint has essentially, it's a perfect document, by the way. But as with all documents, you know, implementation and execution always requires support. So we're working hand in hand and complementing the government's initiative. But the blueprint identifies sort of like 6 student outcomes or aspirations, as they call it. So there's obviously literacy, numeracy, but there are also soft skills like leadership, problem-solving skills, critical thinking. They even have something like national identity and things like that. So if we are to measure against these 6 student outcomes, which therefore indicate success, it's going to be quite hard. I mean, the academic is very easy, so you know that we're doing. But where we are right now is actually investing time in developing this tool where you could actually have a baseline and then look at the delta, because each kids will have different learning deltas, right? So you can't just put an assessment tool out there and say, how's everyone doing with this program? So the way in which we are piloting this is to get the teachers actually to implement this assessment tool, because the teachers will know how their kids are doing, and then create that sort of more accurate and not so you know, I mean, we don't want to end up putting them in boxes around this assessment tool. So we're very careful about how we roll that out.
Thanks. So basically, it's the enhancement to that classroom and that blackboard and the provision of a teacher in a class in that classroom. So we're working on the leadership, and we're working on the assessment of student learning, which brings us to that next level of that McKinsey framework, isn't it? Teacher autonomy and accountability on the part of leaders. Would the two of you want to add, or shall we invite another question? Let's invite another question. Yes. Okay. Over here first, and then in the middle block, and then over there. Do you need a mic? Ani from
Hi,
Indonesia.
Yeah. My name is Andy from Indonesia. I run this corporate foundation called Japfa Foundation. And we've been focusing in agriculture education in Indonesia for youth. And we see that the problem with the education is, I really believe in what Belinda has said, that we need an intervention for the number of schools that we have and all the children that are not in school. Now, we have developed like 3 approaches, working with formal schools and working with informal education on the ground. That is by establishing places that is farming education for public, so no need to pay. It's just a place for them to start learning farming. Now, I see the reason why some children don't have access to education is because of funding, right? So I see from a corporate point of view that we need sort of a return of investment to education, especially in agriculture and other industries. So have you, and thank you for speaking today, have you experienced impact fund usage to education, and can you explain with your experiences of how to deal with that. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I'm going to invite the next question first, whilst Belinda and possibly because of the Yayasan, Hasanah, thinks through ROI on your investment in education. So give you a moment to think. Let's hear your question.
Thank you. My name is Arif Neki from Kenya. I'm delighted to be here and in learning from the Asian experience. I'd just like to kind of get your thoughts about education in its broadest sense. Looking at the context in Africa, and I think many of the countries in Asia may be similar, we have what we're calling the demographic dividend. We're looking at a very young continent. We're looking at the average age of sort of 15 to 25. With about 60% of youth having about 80% of unemployed or underemployed youth. So you get this massive resource of energy, creativity, innovation lying idle. Because a lot of the kids, as you mentioned, tend to be kind of leaking out of the system going from grade 1 upwards. And a lot of children don't even make it to primary school in the first instance. So I guess the perspective I'd like to sort of hear about is, to what extent, when you're thinking about education, are you thinking about market-driven skills training preparedness in order that you actually have kids that can engage more productively, just like many of the Asian tigers like Indonesia and Singapore went so far ahead over the last 50 years, while a lot of our African countries have tended to remain quite stagnant because of the fact that we haven't taken advantage of this demographic dividend. And we only have a receding window of 35 years to get rich before we get old. As we've seen in Europe, the average age is about 49. And linked to that is the perspective around the latest findings on early childhood development. The Lancet series talks about how those first critical 1,000 days really affects the neural pathways that are preparing one for not just lifelong learning, but also lifelong economic and social engagement. And so to what extent, when you think about quality education, do we think about also investing at the right point in time when we can prepare kids for lifelong learning? Thank you.
Gosh, that is a very good question, which I'm sure Wendy and Amitav are dying to answer. But let's get back to ROI on investment.
Sure. I think quality education is something that's very hard to measure, right? I think in Millennium Development Goals, we've had a lot of progress in terms of getting kids in school. But now the problem is that the kids are in school, but they're not learning. And for us, we don't think that there's a magic bullet, and different organizations focus on different things. For us, it's about investing in good leadership, making sure that the teachers and the principals are well supported to become good leaders. So it's not just about pedagogy or curriculum, but also about, their self-awareness, and also, like for a principal, for example, you're managing a school, you're managing a full team of individuals, and how do you motivate your teachers? How do you support your teachers? Those are important skills that we have to inculcate in our school leaders. So for us, the focus has very much been on that. So we don't think that there is a shortcut to getting to quality education. But at the same time, we're also cognizant of the fact, like Peng was saying, that technology is evolving so rapidly. So we're also setting up an innovation fund for education. So almost like what you were saying about impact fund for education that invests in new emerging education technology or innovative classroom models in Indonesia. One of the, I'm very happy to be, this week we just closed one of our first deals, investing in Ruang Guru, which is the largest classroom learning management system in Indonesia. And we believe that, because it's a paid product, maybe it's a freemium it's a freemium model, so they already have an existing partnership with 300 out of the 500 districts in Indonesia, so 60% market share. And we believe that by investing in companies like that, we're able to reach scale at a much faster rate and also be able to measure the impact.
So it's accountability on the part of leadership and technology or innovation.
So ROI in education, it's quite a difficult subject when you speak to investors, right? But the reality is ROI is needed. So we have to think about it. Just to share the experience with the trust schools, we are investing and spending a lot of money in coming up with this assessment tool because the language is all about ROI. But, you know, I think the part of the journey for us has been trying to manage the expectations of stakeholders, managing the expectations of donors. This is sort of like a longitudinal, you know, it's very long term. And where do we want to go? We sometimes call our trust school program a live R&D sort of, you know, and we keep improving, we keep pivoting, we keep, you know, looking at areas in which we could do better, because ultimately what we want is a better learning experience for the child in the classroom, and that he or she can actually maximize his or her own potential. So essentially, that's what it is. So I just wanted to share that because we are part of an investment fund, we have launched the, I think it's the first social bond in the market, raising money actually for the trust schools. So the first bond was for about 100 million ringgit, which is probably about $40 million. And you would imagine, because it was the first social bond and we needed to go and speak to boards, and it's a step down, meaning that if we meet the KPIs, you get to waive your yields and part of your investment. So it was quite hard. And we had to come up with the KPI in terms of what is it that you will achieve in a period of 7 years for the bond. But the bond has been quite successful, well subscribed. And Hasanah is now looking to launch its second social bond, also for the trust school, for the same size of investment. And it's going to be a retail sort of, so each one of us could actually also invest for the cause in education. But I think it's important that we manage stakeholders' expectations about what is it that we want to see in terms of measurements and indicators, and because these are human beings and child from different backgrounds and different realities, and what is it that we want to get out of it. It's a long conversation.
Nice. Very clear objectives.
I
For the
think-
difficult question, advice for Africa.
Well, and just to the question in general, which of course is a huge question, like where to invest, you know, at which point? And I guess my perspective on this, having seen, and I've seen it's just a worldwide phenomenon, you know, people really want to figure out the thing. Like maybe it can be early childhood, or maybe we could just, in the US context, make every school a charter or give every parent a voucher, or, I mean, it's just like we're constantly looking for the thing. And I think when you get into this, you realize, and already just the questions that have already been asked reveal this, right? This is so complex. And, you know, I say that not to elude the answer, but actually to say, I think we need to embrace that complexity and realize the only path to meaningful change for kids and sustainable change is to take the issues on in their complexity. And the issues don't start in classrooms. So we're not going to be able to solve the problem by just focusing on teachers. They don't start in schools either. So we can't just focus there. Ultimately, and every individual needs to figure out which piece of the puzzle to focus on, but ultimately together, we need to take this on, I believe, at the community level. Like really the unit that is big enough to take things on in their full complexity, but small enough to be manageable. And I guess I come to a deep focus, as Belinda does, on leadership, because to me the big question is, who is going to do all of this? Who is going to ensure that we do get the kids into schools in the first place, and then that once they're there, they are learning, and that we take on the nutritional issues, et cetera, et cetera. Like, who is going to do all this in a world where we routinely channel our most educated folks, our most, quote, promising future leaders everywhere, but into this arena of working with the most marginalized kids? That, to me, is, you know, you start getting more and more folks to take this on, and then you have a path to saying, okay, we can, you know, actually make a difference in this. And the last thing I'll just say is, to the point about the kind of we're graduating kids, but they're not ready for careers. And I said this at the beginning, but I think we've got to have a serious conversation in our communities about what we're working towards. Like, we are all working in a system that was set up however many hundreds of years ago, or on models replicating other people's efforts from hundreds of years ago, that was aspiring to a different thing than we need to accomplish today. And if we don't step back in our communities and ask ourselves today, what do we need to be true for our kids? To me, that's the starting point. I read this article in the last year by Peter Senge, I can't get out of a conversation without referencing this article. He basically looks at what accounts for system change across sectors. And his conclusion is it takes collective leadership. And so this article called The Dawn of System Leadership, short piece, is about how do we foster collective leadership. And he basically says, one, you've got to have shared vision, and two, you've got to create space, like to pull people up and have the discussions and debates, build the relationships, grow the collective kind of reflection, learning, wisdom. To me, we need to do this all over the world in our communities. And if we did, I think, as it relates to our kids, like what do we want to have be true for our kids? And I think if we could do that, and it may sound a little, but I honestly, 28 years in, I don't think there's a path to, in our lifetimes, seeing a different place for kids without having that conversation in communities with stakeholders, including kids, families, community leaders, educators, policymakers, and many others.
I'll just add to the question specifically for the Kenyan context, and I think India is similar in that regard. We are the youngest population below the age of 25, the largest population in the world. Close to 300 million Indians will come into the workforce in another 10 to 12 years. Talking about a demographic dividend, I think we're up for a demographic disaster if we continue the way we do. And I think there's two things we're doing right now. We're resolving an immediate solution, which is an immediate problem, which is that a lot of our children coming out of school today are not employable. A lot of our children coming out of college cannot get jobs. So rightly so, we need to skill them, we need to provide them with the necessary vocations or whatever and so have you. But I think that's an immediate problem to fix, and the right one. But I think we need to understand quite quickly why that's the problem. And if that continues, to be able to fix 300 million people coming out of a school system is going to be near impossible, because not everyone is going to be employable. Not everyone needs to be a plumber or a carpenter or an electrician. We need scientists and engineers and doctors and I don't know what, because we're living in a world which is changing more rapidly than we change our clothes. You need to rethink how we educate. While I think in the Indian context today, again, given that we're a poor educational economy, numeracy and literacy is of utmost priority, but can we get our kids to be thinkers and adapters and job creators, entrepreneurs, not necessarily job takers? How do we rethink that, I think, is critical. And to Wendy's point about doing that collectively, as opposed to someone sitting in a school or an institution defining what the curriculum to be able to achieve that might look like, I don't think that's necessarily the right way to do it. I think we need to collaborate to find the solution.
Thanks, Amitav. There was a question from that side earlier on. Would you please ask? Sorry. I'll get from both of you. Yeah. Go ahead first. Yeah.
Oh, hi, my name is Quinn from Health Age, and I'm based here in Thailand. I will throw you a curveball, a very, very wild curveball.
All right.
Okay, and basically looking at education for all, I'm not sure if you guys realize that Asia is rapidly aging, especially in Thailand, where the percentage of older people are almost at par with the young children, under 15. And in another few years, older people will be surpassing young children at the moment. And so the demand for education for older people, from middle age to older people, are extremely, extremely large, but the gap is enormous. Very, very few people are focusing on older people as a source of education target.
Okay.
That's one area. Another one is teach for all. I'm not quite sure that the number and percentage of people that are retiring are very, very high, especially for a poor community. You can tap them as teachers, volunteer teachers, to fulfill the need and the gaps or something. So that's something that I really want to
Good
share.
point. Thank you. The lady, let's hear from the lady in front.
Hi, my name is Talitha Malia. I'm from Solve Education. I'm still quite young, but I spent most of my life studying education and also teaching in classrooms. My questions is building on what Wendy has explained and Belinda as well. I agree that when it comes to solving education, we need an immediate intervention, but I think we also do not need to expect just immediate change, but a more, like you said, sustainable change and improvements. As an educator and a researcher in education, I have seen so many research on educations, how we improve educations, but in reality there's just a big disconnect between what these experts propose and what we actually do. So my question is that it's quite easy to discuss about what to teach to our children. You talked about expecting our kids to be thinkers, change makers, job creators, and so on and so forth. But sometimes, I think oftentimes, we forget that, we forget to engage these children. You talked about communities, communicating with communities, talking with them and learn from them what they need and what they want. But I just fear, as an educator, as a teacher, working with children, I fear that, sometimes we as adults forget to engage them into the decision making. We sometimes forget to ask them, how do we adults, effectively teach this subject, this knowledge and skills for them, and what works for them? So I guess my question is basically, have we thought about that? Have we thought about engaging children into the discussion, keeping them in the loop and asking what they need and what they want? Thank you.
Thank you. So 2 comments there, one on the aging population, who's going to teach them or who's going to use them as resource, and the other is about engaging children and their sense of agency. I'm sure we could take 1 or 2 more questions, right? Because those gentlemen in front. And I know the gentleman with the red tie as well, you want to ask a question. Both of you will get your chance. We only have 1 mic. Okay.
This conference is about collaboration and working together. In my personal view, education is by far very important. But if you have stunting or if you have income inequality and the kids need to go to work in the tea houses and others, they don't get to school. So my question really is, how can we get a more holistic approach to this? Because I think a significant percent of the education problem is not necessarily, it's related to education, but it's related to the other issues that these families face.
Thank you. So I know you come from 30 countries. I know some of you would have some responses and useful observations or insights for some of the questions asked. So I'll invite your comments later. Gentleman in the red tie, I don't want to disappoint you because, you've been waiting. So let's hear your question and then we'll have each of you comment on one of the questions.
My name is Rakesh Hamal. I'm from Nepal.
Nepal.
So, and I'm very glad to be in this conference, and I think it is a very good theme, quality education for all. And I work in the area of disability in Nepal. My question is my concern is we've been talking about the quality education, we've been talking about the classrooms, syllabus, teachers, students, facilities, everything. But I think somewhere we have forgotten the people with disability, like the people, physically challenged people. We're talking about education for all, we make the policies, but we forget that if we do not provide the accessibility to the physically challenged people or differently able people to get to the school, they will be always left out, you know. So I think that is the one thing I've even read in the World Bank report for education for all, and all the government policies. I mean, at least I can speak of my country because I'm with the Social Welfare Council of the government of Nepal also. We have all these education facilities, you know, like free admission, free books, lunch, everything. But we are really missing something, is we're not bringing that population that is left behind, neglected population, to the school if we do not provide them the accessibility how to get to the school.
Okay.
So I think this needs to be also discussed.
Right.
Thank you.
First to the mic gets the easiest question.
Well, I'll jump off of, first of all these questions and points really resonate. And I think for me, just bring me back to, I mean, this is a big and overwhelming challenge. And when you look at history, what do we do when we face big and overwhelming challenges? We build movements of our best minds and best leaders to tackle them in their complexity. And I think we just, in education, I'm actually surprised at how much the topic of leadership has come up, because typically we don't talk about it. You know, I think when you're in business, you take a really intentional approach to cultivating the leadership capacity you need, and I just think we need to do a lot more of that, and defining, you know, if the goal is all kids fulfilling their potential, we know education is the key to transformation, but we know it's not sufficient. If we're not taking on the broader issues, we'll never get where we need to be. So I'll just say yes to all the above. I do want to say one thing about the student leadership point, because I really couldn't agree more strongly. I mean, when we think about, okay, so the kids in our classrooms today, in a very few years, are going to be responsible, hopefully, for getting our society out of the mess that it's currently in. They need to be leading, and they're not going to wake up 10 years from now and start doing that if they're not doing it today. So the question of how do we foster student leadership today is just huge. And I'll just share one story, which is that I was listening to an incredible teacher in Latvia talk about, you know, a bunch of parents basically recruited her to start a school that would really rethink education, and they had no resources. And so, but she built the whole thing with her kids, who were ages 6 through 9, literally designing the school. Like, the whole thing is around, the students are going to draw out, this is what we want our school to look like. The kids figure out the lesson plans. They pair students with teachers. They've got all the standards. The kids brainstorm the topics, and then they'll pair a teacher with a kid to say, you all are in charge of teaching today's lesson, and they figure it out together. When they need resources, the kids write the emails. So we're in this big global conference, and this incredible woman who was one of the global teacher finalists a couple years ago is explaining this story, and the head of the guy who's trying to start Teach for Uganda basically said, you know what, we're graduating 17-year-olds who can't write emails, and you're telling me that these 6-year-olds are writing emails asking for resources for their schools. And so at every turn, I come to the conclusion that you came to as well. Like, we're underestimating our kids, and in some ways, our biggest asset may be our lack of resources, right? Like, let's use all of our resources, and probably our best resources are our kids.
Great example on student voice and agency.
I'll just address
Is this about the aged or the disability?
No, so yeah, all the
or the
questions are too
holistic
tough. I'm going to try and take the easiest of the toughest. I think the point Doug made is a very important one, and I just want to go back to why that might be the case. Why are the kids not in school and in the tea houses? Why are they daily wage earners? Why are they child laborers? And I go back to the point that Ong Peng made earlier, and citing the example of the kids, I think it was in Vietnam, when they turned 14, the first thing they did was buy a mobile phone. And why did they do that? Because they clearly see the value of that device. And I think, Doug, the point that I'm trying to make here is we're failing to provide the value add of education today for the average child. Fundamentally, I think all of us would agree that every parent wants to educate their children. Every parent believes that it's education that is the way out of poverty. But we fail too many of them. Too many of our systems across the globe have failed that expectation, and we repeatedly do so. It's going to be small incremental steps where we can start making a difference by showing immediate gain. And immediate gain could be your child can read, your child can do simple math, because that's a near term. No one's going to wait 12 or 15 years to say, will my child get a job? Will they get a career? Will they be able to earn more? That's just too far out. So if we can make short-term promises and deliver against those short-term promises, I believe we can regain the lost confidence of parents. The small example that I give you in the work we do, and I don't know if Urmila is sitting here from ARC. If you are, just raise your hand. Yeah, there she is. Urmila's organization took over a school that is part of our network. There were 9 children in the school when they took it over. Today there's nearly 400 kids. And the way they did that was through painstaking effort of going out and speaking to every parent and making promises and delivering against those promises. And when the first set of 120 parents came in year 1, it was the word of mouth through those 120 parents that then got the next set of 150 and the next set of 100, because they said, these guys are doing the work that we want to see happen. And I think it's effects like that that need to then permeate through the rest of the system to create that change.
Thank you. I'm allowed to take 10 more minutes. I know it's 11. Let's quicken the pace. Yeah. The elderly, or what would you like to
I just wanted
address?
to address the community engagement bits, because if you look at many of these, education levers or platforms, parents and community engagement is always there, but it's always the least maximized programs that are being done in there, because people are probably still trying to figure this out. So it's actually quite enlightening to hear that that approach is being done. I just wanted to make a quick plug to Teach for Malaysia, actually, because recently one of the fellows, she journals her experience in the school, and so she wrote her entire experience of 2 years, and bumped into a movie director who said, can we make your story a movie? And that's been quite transformational in the sense that it opened the eyes for others to actually see what the realities are. And many of that came about around community, because in a school context, when you don't get kids coming to school, it's really about attendance rates, right? You don't go beyond that. So attendance rate is low, and whatever livelihoods or income and things like that. So they become just statistics. So that movie was quite an eye-opener, and the teacher actually went home to visit, because she's got this 4 or 5 kids who were not coming to school, and she actually went out to go and find out why they're not coming to school. And she says that to the kids. She's like, no, but whatever your challenges are, you must show up. Education is important. And one of the girls who actually had to do 2 jobs because her dad is ill, and it's only 2 of them in the family, she has to work because otherwise she and her father won't have anything to eat. And so when the teacher kept saying, no, but you have to come to school because this is what's going to get you out. And she just looked at the teacher squarely in the eye and said, I don't think you understand what I'm trying to tell you. So these things, when you see, many of us are shielded from these realities. So for the foundation, actually, because we do community development as well, now we are looking to shift. So instead of school just being school, we're now looking at the community and the school surrounding that community. So it's almost like a reverse approach to looking at how we empower kids in schools. Yeah.
I'm just going to comment briefly on the questions. I think it's when we talk about quality education for all, and it's an interesting comments about what does all mean, whether you're applying the gender lens, or whether you're applying the aging population lens, or the people with disabilities. I think regardless of whatever lens that you know, whatever unique perspective that you bring to the table. It's very important that, you know, as an organization to remain very focused and very, in setting up the systems to have a quick feedback loop to get your stakeholders' feedback back to improving your programs. But having said that, one of our biggest realizations also after doing work in Indonesia for about 10 years, we realized that if we do it alone, we can only achieve incremental change. And then for us to be able to achieve transformative change, we need to be able to do it together. So one of the things that a couple of the foundations in Indonesia are working on, we realized education is the top issue that everyone's working on. The bulk of philanthropic money in Indonesia is going to education. But no one really knows who's doing what, and no one is assessing what's working on the ground, what's ready to be scaled up. So we realized that there's a lot of missed opportunities for collaboration, as well as areas of duplication, right? So one of the things that we're working on together with Asia Philanthropy Circle and another foundation is to do a landscape mapping study. And I'd really love for, you know, all of you who are in the audience to be participating as well in the study.
Great idea. I know one of our participants here is waiting to comment, so let's give him the mic. I'll invite some of you who've got ideas to comment, because we can round up with some of your own perspectives too, and then I'll give our special guests their last say before we end. Please.
Hi, yeah, Matthew from We Study, based here in Thailand. My question is, given the daunting amount of resources required to transform education that the panel and the keynote has been talking about, I'd be interested to get the thoughts of the panel on the possibilities of online education as a replacement for traditional brick and mortar schooling, leveraging technology for a more efficient use of human capital, and as a 21st century solution to bring quality education to rural communities.
Great, thank you. Yes.
Good morning, thanks for your comments. I'm with FHI 360 here in Bangkok. My name is Phil Silos. We implement both education programs focused on basic goals like literacy and numeracy, better use of data in schools worldwide, particularly in Africa. And on the other side, separately, we think a lot about the future of work in terms of the employability of graduates and the future sort of labor market pathways. Now, I appreciated Wendy's comment on leadership and sort of encouraging student leadership as a way to prepare for the future. But I was hoping that others could comment maybe 2 or 3 things that you think basic education programs can do now, today, to prepare the lower socioeconomic status kids for a very uncertain, technology-driven, and probably less formal labor market future.
Great question.
I think we need to start now. Thanks.
Great question. Yes. Up front here. And the lady over here.
Thank you. My name is Daniel Chen from Malaysia. We operate the largest network of IB World Schools, 5 of them. This is by far the most interesting part of my retiring years, having been there for 10 years, in the last 10 years in a normal traditional international school where practices rote learning.
Sure.
I think that's the fundamental issues I'm talking about. And then the first 20 years is like the gentleman, the most boring job as a corporate finance, ROI, KPI, and those kind of nonsense. Okay. It is. And also a Harvard graduate like you, it's terrible. Coming back to the last 10 years, we transformed from a very, very cheap school in Malaysia, from a traditional rote learning to international school to an IB school, and then spread it out during the last 10 years into a network of 5 other schools with a very unique things. The perceptions of the IB schools is expensive for elite, smart, intelligent people. All these are rubbish, not true. Okay. Our school fee starts with $3,000 US a year.
question or comment?
It's a sharing of that things here. It's don't give fish to the kids.
Give
Teaching
them
them
real stuff.
how to fish.
Okay.
And that starts with teachers. 9 out of 10 of our teachers are trained, groomed, brought up from the industrial educations.
Okay.
They were rote learning themselves. They can change the pattern of how they want to teach. So start from there, unlearning, give them the challenge of unlearning. They are the transformer for the future generations. If they are wrong, just like a master copy of a photocopying process, if they are wrong, the rest will all be wrong. And that's basically what I want to share.
Okay.
Thank
Invest in teacher education. Thank you very much. And the lady in orange. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Irina Franken. I'm a professional trustee. And as a trustee, I always think about beneficiaries. And I'm actually thinking how often we think about our beneficiaries. Maybe a little bit tough question, but being corporates, coming into philanthropy, do we serve beneficiaries or do we serve actually organization? And that's what I really want to understand. That's why that question arises. Do we hear our beneficiaries? Do we need holistic approach to education? That's when the mind of our beneficiaries completely changed.
Okay.
And that is really social impact when we can't turn them back. My question.
Thank you very
is,
much.
Do we think about
So I know some of you really have to go. I'm going to ask each of them to comment on one of the questions that they've heard, and that will be their last say. Who would like to start?
Well, I'll comment on the first. First of all, I think we're not leveraging technology. I mean, to state the absolute obvious, in education, we need to be leveraging it much more. So on the one hand, yes. On the other hand, I guess what I've seen is that when, especially maybe when we're working with the most vulnerable kids, relationships are everything. Every study we do about what differentiates the most successful of our teachers, it's relationships. They are relational people. They're building relationships with their kids, with the families, with others in their schools, actually. We aren't going to be able to take relationships out of the picture. So I guess I think we need both.
Great. Amitav.
Yeah, just echoing that, I'll give you an example again, specifically on the technology question. I think we need to leverage technology, not for the sake of it, but if it does add value. To specifically give you examples how some of our partners have used technology in their schools has been more around teacher, devices being used as teacher aids, specifically to do two things. One is to get scripts on lesson plans. And the kind of teachers we work with, I think a scripted approach seems to work really well. The early data tells us that if teachers have very scripted instructions on what they need to do, that doesn't mean that takes away the creativity on learning. It just gives them very good instructions on how to teach or how to run a classroom because it's scripted. That seems to be working really well. The second is on student data collection, specifically with regard to formative assessments. So we are beginning to see the use of technology in these two areas. And the early indications are it's too early to say whether it's doing better or not, but that's where we're pushing for greater use of technology in the work that we do.
So I feel that all the questions that has come through resonates so much because the issues and the challenges are real. I think on digital innovation, at least specific to the Malaysian context, while we have one of the highest in mobile users and I think second largest Facebook users and things like that. Our challenge in taking technology to the schools is really the internet sort of access. And so a lot of these things kind of slows down because they do not really have fast access and things like that. But I guess I just wanted to close to say that collaboration in the sector is so critical. I think just in this panel, we all seem to be surfacing very familiar concerns and very familiar issues. So I think if there's so much investments going into the sector, we really need to ramp up a collaborative or sort of like a collective impact approach, where everyone has a common shared agenda in terms of how we put our resources into the classrooms in wherever it is that we are.
Belinda.
I completely agree with you, Shahira, about how we, foster collaboration. And I think when we say collaboration, it's also important not just to have a collaborations amongst the funders, but also going back to your question about making sure that the beneficiaries' voices are also represented as part of the multi-sector collaboration. I think that's extremely important. As well as making sure that the people who are involved in doing the job, the teachers, their voices are represented as well. I think when we think of collaboration, we have to think about it in a really broad sense, because the scale of the problem is so immense, and that we need all of us to be working together.
Right. I think we've covered a lot of ground. Basic facilities, teacher training, teacher empowerment, student voice, student agency, accountability on the part of leadership, community involvement, engagement with all parties. We haven't quite mentioned government responsibility. And my last word would be, it is really all about political will. You can't do all this without government resources and that political will and discipline to say, let's fix our problems at all levels. Basic education, yes. Vocational for those who are right up there needing jobs. And for those who are in the job market not getting jobs, let's upskill, reskill them, and put the commitment there. And all round, I don't think it's either or, it's let's attack it at all levels. This is the Singaporean way. We don't expect everyone to think like us. I'm sorry, but I'm Singaporean. I will end just saying this. Thank you very much for being a great audience, for all your questions, and for all the learning that's going to come when we interact with each other outside. Yeah? Thank you very much.